Good afternoon. May I say welcome to our students who have joined us here today from so many far places. I don't have to tell you that I wish we were going to have a much longer program, but you all know the reasons why it isn't practical this month. And so we'll have to look forward to another return to South Africa. Sometimes they speak about this as darkest Africa, and you think after you've been in the dark 3 times, it's enough. But actually, it isn't really dark, as you know. And my first 2 trips were really marvelous ones here. And I look forward to the same this trip. But we'll have to take it the way it is and be good-natured about it. There isn't any other thing to do. Somebody wrote me a letter today and asked if there is a reason why we get sick. And I thought there were millions of reasons why. I think we're always violating laws of some kind or other. But it all goes back to one reason. The same reason that we have accidents, the same reason that we have wars, the same reason that we have economic depressions. There's really only one reason. We haven't completely become acquainted with God. There's only one remedy to all of man's troubles, and that actually is knowing God aright. We all have some slight acquaintance with God. We all know God to some extent, but we haven't gone far enough, not only for ourselves, but more especially for the world. In the past history of mankind, as we study the history of many of the former great nations, we find that there is a pattern that runs all through every civilization that has ever existed. In the beginning, men are ignorant. They're in darkness. They're not only mentally and intellectually dark, but certainly spiritually dark. And then somehow in each nation there comes a glimmer of light, the beginning of the understanding that there is a power, a presence, a being greater than ourselves. Now this, of course, is startling, because in our ignorance we are about the biggest thing that exists and the most important. And so when we begin to catch a glimpse of what the Master must have meant when he said, I can of my own self do nothing, or if I speak of myself I bear witness to a lie, the moment we begin to catch a glimpse of that and realize that there is a something. Now, it isn't necessary at first to know what that something is or how it functions. It's enough to know that there is a something greater than we ourselves, something that in some ages has been called God, in other ages has been called gods, and other names as well. But you can understand that the name or the names are really of no importance whatsoever. What counts is whether or not we begin to understand the nature of it and how it functions or why it functions, or what we must do to bring it into function. At any rate, in all past civilizations, this glimpse of light, no matter how small, has opened the mentality of men so that they began to see deeper into their own mind. And the first thing you know, instead of just the slavery of the farm, they began to bring through inventions, discoveries. One of the first was mathematics. And mathematics led to some of the great engineering feats, road building, fence building, temples, palaces. All of you who have traveled through any of the ancient countries, whether it is India, China, Egypt, you know the nature, Rome, Italy, Greece. You know the nature of the tremendous engineering feats that were performed more than 2,000 years ago. 2,500, 3,000. When you examine some of the temples and pyramids in Egypt of 4,000 years ago and more, and see the great accomplishments of those days, you will understand what I mean when I say that with the very first glimpse of something greater than ourselves, our mind begins to open, and it reveals to us hidden treasures. Now, the great discoveries of the world do not exist out in the world. They all exist in the mind of man. Even as we come up to our modern days, and you take the automobile and the airplane and the television, the telegraph, the telephone, you'll find that each one of these was brought forth out of the mind of man. You didn't discover it outside on the street or on his farm. Every single great invention and discovery has been found inside the mind of man, brought forth, externalized as form. And the more illumined spiritually that man becomes, the greater the material and mental and cultural graces come forth from his mind. That was early in this century that the prediction was made by the great electrical wizard, Steinmetz, that it would be in this century that the secret of spiritual power would be revealed. By the very manner of his saying it, you know that he meant that never before in the history of the world has the secret of spiritual power been known. Never, at any time, by anyone. Glimpses, yes. Slight understandings, yes. Tiny bits of demonstration, yes. But the secret of spiritual power has never been known. Now, to what extent it exists today, as known, depends entirely on who it is that is doing the knowing. In other words, as far as the public is concerned, there is no more known as spiritual power today than ever was known in the past. But there are here and there individuals who have gone further in understanding the nature of spiritual power, so that we still have reason to believe that this is the century in which the full secret of spiritual power will be revealed. Now, back in these early civilizations, we speak of man before he begins to suspect God as unillumined, as in the dark. And then, as he begins to come into the light of some measure of spiritual awareness, some measure of contact with God, we speak of him as becoming more illumined, and then we make this great discovery that the mind, through the Spirit, the mind becomes illumined and awakened, and from the depths of the mind come forth these great discoveries, the ones that had their beginning in mathematics and came through in various ages as the great works of art, science, building, industry, and so forth. Now, in every previous civilization, we make the discovery that they all came to the same end. Every civilization up to the present one that has ever existed has died. Every civilization has gone out of existence. It makes no difference whether you talk about the ancient Chinese or the Hindu or the Egyptian, the Roman, the Greek, the Holy Lands. Wherever there has been a civilization, it has died. Study the history of these countries and you will find out why. To begin with, every civilization has resulted in a society of two kinds of people, the high and the low, the up and the down, the rich and the poor, the free and the slave. And while those who were down weren't really living, they were the walking dead. They just walked through a span of years until came time to bury them. They had no life on earth whatsoever. Those who are up in every civilization all took the same path. When they reached the heights of all that their mind could bring forth, their great inventions, their great discoveries, their great edifices, they all took the same route down. They all went down with drink, wine, women, song, gambling, decadence, immorality, sensuality. They took the whole route, one after another of them, took the whole route downward until their civilizations were wiped out. You might say, could they have been saved, or could any one of them have been saved? And that brings us up to our present era, because we have that question to answer now. You and I individually, just as much as the rest of the world outside of this room. Because this is the place where our present civilization is at the present moment. We have found just enough of spiritual truth to open and awaken our minds. Out of our minds has come the greatest discoveries ever known in the history of the world, far greater in the last 100 years than in any previous 3,000 years. And where has that brought us? It has brought us almost to the same state of civilization as the older ones, only within another 50 years, perhaps, there will be no slaves on earth, and there will be almost no working men on earth. In the normal run of events, 50 years from now, everybody will be a skilled mechanic or an executive or a designer or a builder, a creator, but there will be no laborers. Not only no slaves, there won't even be laborers of any kind. I can tell you at this moment of factories that are being built to be operated without labor. Or a speech that was made by the head of the mines of England a few weeks ago when I was there, in which he was asked the question, since the young men are no longer going into the mines, what are you going to do for labor in the next generation? Oh, he said, we're not engaging labor. As these men who are now laborers in the mines retire, they are not replaced, because we need no labor in our coal mines. They can all be mined electronically. I know of another factory in England being planned to be 5 times bigger than anything England has ever known before, and it will be operated entirely without labor. So that, in the normal course of events, this century will also see 2 classes of society. The men and women who have everything and the machines that are the slaves. Our slaves in this age will just be machinery, and all of the rest of us will be, well, now let's see where. We're going to have 4-day working weeks pretty soon in the States. That ought to be followed very soon by 4-day working weeks elsewhere in the world. What do we do on those 3 days? Well, I don't know anything about your movies here or your television. I know about ours. I know about our wrestling matches and fights. The same gladiators of old are still gladiating all around the world. And they're either throwing bulls or being thrown to the lions or to each other. Going on, though. And, of course, wine, woman, and song, all you have to do is look into your income tax records to find, or ours in England, to find out what's happening to the liquor industry and the burlesque industry and so forth. And if you judge by what you read, you would be very nearly right if you would say that we are now in the state of society when very soon none of us are going to have to work too hard for a living, and we'll all be ready to go down that same path of wine, woman, song, gambling, and all the rest of it. And another civilization about to come to an end. It could happen. It could happen that way, or it could happen with a couple of stupid people throwing bombs at each other, which would do the same thing, only more quickly. But the difference that exists today is that there is an opportunity that perhaps no civilization of the past ever had. Today there is an opportunity to discover the nature of spiritual power. Now, you know from your own studies and meditations and your way of life, and you know by what you have witnessed in the experience of others who have come to the metaphysical path through one approach or another, that phase of life, that decadent phase, is bypassed. It really doesn't exist among the people of the metaphysical or spiritual world. In other words, it is already proven in a measure that through the little that we already know about spiritual power and spiritual nature, or the nature of God, that there are several million people on earth who are already outside of any danger from what may come with a 4-day week or a 3-day week or lots of leisure or lots of income. In other words, that those who have found some measure of spiritual power have something with which to replace the material pleasures and dissipations, not only to replace it, but something to erase it completely from their consciousness. If you only look at what may be 1.5 or 2 million people on earth who have embraced the metaphysical and spiritual religions, you will discover that those are already past the danger of being wiped out as civilization, and therefore, if it can happen to 1 or 2 million, it can happen to all of the rest. Now this is the point, that in all past civilizations, nobody revealed the nature of God to the world. The word God, yes. The nature of God, no. The word God, yes. But the actual presence and experience of God, no. With the exception of the few mystics who actually experienced God and was enabled to introduce God to their immediate disciples or immediate followers. There's very little history anywhere to be found of any age in which God has been known on earth. Fictions about God, yes. Mythology about God, yes. False worship, yes. But the actual coming into the experience of God has been so limited that you'd have to search libraries for years to find literature about it. And then you would only find it for very brief periods. Now, here we come to an age where enough has been revealed about the nature of God and the nature of spiritual power that we can count those who know and experience in millions. Therefore, we have come to the point now where it can hopefully be expected that the entire world can experience a new birth, the rebirth that was promised. Of course, the entire experience begins individually. It has to be. There has to be an individual Gautama, there has to be an individual Lao Tzu, there has to be an individual Jesus or John or Paul. There has to be an individual in every age. It has to begin with an individual, but from there on, it has to find its way into human consciousness. You might ask at this point, are you honest in believing that this age can be different than others? And I'm going to answer you truthfully that I not only am completely honest when I say to you that it is possible, but I'm going to go further and say that I believe it is an absolute probability that we are going into a spiritual age. And there is a reason for my inner confidence. There are lots of reasons for my inner confidence. Number one, all of the mystics of the past had a great deal of difficulty in getting their wisdom beyond their immediate circle because there were no printing presses, no radio, no television, no way of circularizing. The few manuscripts that were written were so very few that they were hugged by anyone who had them and almost hidden so that they wouldn't travel too far away. So that spreading the word itself was virtually an impossible situation. Today, on the other hand, we have the benefit, let me tell you this one. It isn't only that we have radio and we have television and we have all of these other things, but a year ago I learned that all of my writings are circulating in Poland. How? Because somebody has written them in manuscript form like letters. And they have been mailed into Poland and they're spreading in Poland. So we have the benefit of post office departments, even enemy post office departments. Everything works together for those who love good, it would seem. But just imagine the benefit that we have in the form of the press. My books, for instance, are published in the United States in American editions, in England in British editions. Germany has German editions. Holland has Dutch. Japan has Japanese. And this is only the start. So that we have the printing press. How many things go over the air on radio and television can hardly be imagined. One of them, I think, of very great significance that happened only a couple of weeks ago. Perhaps you know that a rule was passed some time ago ruling the devil out of the Catechism of the Church of England. And that so many of the lay members objected that they had to put the devil back in temporarily. But that doesn't mean that the higher-ups do not know that there is no devil. Now, they decided to find out about all of this mystery, and so they had former Archbishop of Canterbury, Geoffrey Fisher, on the television to be questioned about some of these newfangled religious beliefs. And the very first question that was asked of him was, "Now, Dr. Fisher, you really do believe in God and devil, don't you?" And Dr. Fisher answered, "You know, I think of God as infinite." Now, you know where that left the devil. You can't have an infinite God and a devil. Now just think of this going out over the air all over England, that Dr. Fisher, former Archbishop of Canterbury, believes that God is infinite. You know, it's enough to make some of the people suspect that the metaphysicians are right, that evil isn't real, that the devil isn't real, that sin isn't real, disease isn't real, death isn't real. So if God is life and God is infinite, these other things can't exist. Now, it was shocking enough in our metaphysical days when Christian Science, unity, and New Thought taught us these things, but now when we have the great big churches come out and tell us that God is infinite, we have the right to say, my heavens, maybe it's true. God is infinite. And if God is infinite, we begin to embrace the idea of that infinity, and we ourselves lose the fear of the devil, the fear of evil, the fear of sin, the fear of disease. And you know, when you lose the fear of them, you lose the pleasure in them too. It just is not possible to lose fear and find pleasure in it. And therefore, the greatest forward step in the history of the world is for us to lose our fear of sin. Because in losing our fear of it, we lose our pleasure in it. It all goes in one time. And when it happens, that's when the universe is saved from this catastrophe, this threatened catastrophe of going back into decadence. And you might at this point ask, well, but even suppose there were 10 million of us believing this way, would that have an influence on the other 3 billion? You just bet it would. 10 righteous men are enough to save a city. 2 or more gathered together are enough to perform miracles. 1 with God is a majority. And so you would discover that just this, that we, the metaphysicians of the world, just what we have been entertaining in consciousness this last 3/4 of a century on the subject of the infinite nature of God is now spreading to the millions of the church as they hear that God is infinite. And don't forget, when they hear it, it doesn't spread one by one. When they hear it, it goes over the television to be heard by millions at one time. What? God is infinite. A couple of years ago, the outstanding Roman Catholic in the United States, Bishop Sheehan, certainly the most popular, on one of his television shows ended his broadcast this way. And dear friends, please, when you pray to God, don't pray for any material thing, for God is spirit. That went out to millions. And you know, that has been taught by those of the spiritual faiths for a long, long time. And now it begins to reach all mankind overnight. Don't pray to God for material things, for God is spirit. You see what can happen in the space of one evening in London, New York, Berlin, Paris. Just one evening, as these ideas that have been lived by you, by me, even in a tiny measure. Let's not take pride that we've gone too far. They're like Paul. I'm not claiming to have reached the ultimate, but at least, forgetting my past, I am looking toward a greater demonstration of the realization of the omnipotence of one power. Now, think that we of the metaphysical world who have been embodying these truths, declaring them, affirming them, living them, in some measure proving through our improved health or improved morals or improved supply, in some measure we have been proving these things, proving that they're true, and now the world is taking notice of it. And therefore, what it has taken 75 years to build up in the consciousness of 1 million people or 2 million people, all of a sudden in one night can become the consciousness of 5 million more or 7 million more, because it only takes one statement of that nature coming from an authority to change the consciousness of all or many of their hearers. A bishop recently told a group of ministers that the time has come when we must begin to teach our people that they must not go to church to pray for new automobiles or for rain or for not rain or for things. That we must begin to teach them the nature of God as spirit and God's blessings as spiritual blessings. This is how the truth of the nature of God, the nature of spirit, the nature of spiritual power is permeating consciousness. And when I see this, and heaven knows I have an opportunity in traveling the world, when I see this permeating church after church, denomination after denomination, when I see books of the nature of all of the Infinite Way books on sale in the bookstores of the churches, can you not see what is happening to consciousness? Can you not see what is happening as one individual goes up to a bookstall and buys one of these books, and the first thing you know, discovers something that they suspected before but hadn't completely realized, and goes to their neighbor with it, and then the first thing you know, what happens? Joel was invited into the church to talk about this very thing. Do you not see that this is the age that, with the help of what is being revealed to us of the nature of spirit and the nature of spirit's blessings, that in a degree as we ourselves are permeated with it and prove that this world, the world of sin, disease, and death, has no more attraction for us and no more fear, that as this takes place within us, that it begins to take place in the rest of the world, because in this age we have the benefit not only of every mechanical means of sending the world far and wide, whether through printing press, radio, or television, but we have, in addition to that, a more enlightened church than has ever been on earth in the history of the world. Don't forget that when all of these older civilizations were wiped out, that the churches of their day were pretty dense and dark. Don't forget today that the churches of today are becoming more and more and more enlightened. We only need one evidence of it, the doing away with the devil, to show what is happening in the church world. Because when you have done away with the devil, I think I have to tell you this one. I can't help enjoying it every time I think of it. Khalil Gibran, the author of The Prophet, he wrote a story that resulted in his excommunication from the church. Although after he passed on, they accepted him back and buried him in holy ground. But he was, for a while, excommunicated because he wrote this story. There was a priest walking along the road, and he heard cries from the side of the road. A man wounded, in danger, crying out for help. And he ran over into the bushes to this man and began to attend to him, fix him up, whatever was needed. And all of a sudden he caught a glimpse of the man's face, and he said, "Oh, I know you, don't I?" "Oh, yes," the man said. "I'm your best friend." "Oh, no," the priest said. "No, you're not my best friend. I know my best friend. But I do know you. I do. I remember you. I know your face. You are the devil." "Well, yes, I told you I'm your best friend." Well, the priest ran away. "You deserve to die. I won't help you." Well, the man called after him and finally attracted his attention and brought him back. And he said, "You can't let me die. If I die, who's going to pay pennies to light candles? If I die, who needs prayers?" And the priest fixed him up right quickly. Well, you can imagine that excommunication served him right. But the point is, what would happen in our lives? Now, we're pretty well advanced on the spiritual path, but what do you think would really happen in our lives if we here in this room became convinced that there is no evil power? I mean, absolutely convinced, not just read it in books and affirmed it. I mean, absolutely came to the conviction that God is omnipotent, there cannot be an evil power. Would you say the same thing? Goodbye, practitioners. Your fees are over. Once we come to the realization that the nature of God is spirit, and therefore the nature of creation is spiritual, do you not see how that changes the whole nature of our being? And we do not concern ourselves with a structural universe. You see, what is it really concerns us, every one of us, if it isn't a structural universe? The bones of our body, the organs of our body, the functions of our body. That's what's bothering us. That's the only reason we fear sickness. But supposing the absolute conviction came that God is omnipotent, God is spirit, the whole nature of this world must be spiritual. In that second, we lose the fear of the organs and functions of our body. We lose the fear of bones. We lose the fear of brain. In that moment, we begin to absorb in consciousness the idea of the nature of God as spirit. And this is the point that's been lacking, because in the prayers of the world up to the present time, we have been trying to get a spiritual God to do something to our structural body, or our structural business, or our structural government. We have been trying to get a God of spirit to do something to a material universe. And until we discover the nature of God as spirit, we are not going to discover the nature of this universe as a spiritual universe governed by the very substance and law that formed it. Now, in the first chapter of Genesis, the world could be saved. And we don't know whether this is omitted because the word wasn't known, or whether it was mistranslated or misinterpreted. But when you say God created this world and all that is in it in his image and likeness, you are making a statement that makes absolutely no sense. You could repeat it from now to the rest of your days, but it makes no sense, because if someone said, well then, if man is made in the image and likeness of God, what is God? And then we're stuck. Because those three letters, G-O-D, are absolutely meaningless. No one has ever invented a meaning for that word God. Therefore, when you say man is made in the image and likeness of God, you're saying man is made in the image and likeness of I know not what. Now, begin to understand God as spirit, incorporeal being. Begin to understand God as consciousness, which eventually you will as you study the infinite way. And then realize that the nature of man is the image and likeness of consciousness, formed of consciousness, not structurally, formed of consciousness, governed by the law of its creative principle, creative substance, and all of a sudden you have a universe, including your own body, completely devoid of fear. You have no more fear for this universe. You have no more fear for your body. You have no more fear if they blow it up with bombs, because 2 seconds later it reforms itself and a new population begins. The old ones always have gone out, the new ones always have come in, and the continuity will go forward. So that, really, if you stop to ask yourself why we have senseless fears, you have to answer that, well, I'm just afraid I won't have 5 or 10 or 15 years more of life, or 20, because at the most, that is what the middle-aged person is expecting, 5, 10, 15, 20, and just to have the hope of that is quite enough. And what we're doing in talking about bombs, or talking about wiping them out in any other way, is just denying them that extra 5 or 10 or 15 years, and that's all that the fear is about. There's only one way in which that fear can be eliminated. If you really catch a glimpse of God as Spirit, you really catch a glimpse of the fact that man is made in the image and likeness of God, therefore man is spiritual, or you catch the glimpse that God is the life of the universe, therefore God is your life's indestructible. It makes no difference whether they blow your body up, your life goes right on and forms a new one. It makes no difference if we come to a period of some sickness or age and for a moment have a fright as we leave this body. We find out very, very quickly that God is the life of man. Man is made in the image and likeness of God. Therefore, the life of God is the life of man. The soul of God is the soul of man, and as God is indestructible, so is man. And so whether he comes to the end of his so-called structural period, when he's 30 or when he's 90, doesn't change the fact that his life is everlasting, and it's going to continue, and it's going to continue in a progressive state. When we lose the fear of death, we have lost the fear of everything that can harm this universe, because the first fear that humans suffer from is the fear of sin. But the ultimate fear is the fear of death. As long as that fear of death persists, we will be proving that we have not yet discovered the nature of God, and we will be in the same position as our ancestors, who also did not discover the nature of God. But today, we do not have their excuse. Today, we have the revelations that bring to us concretely, specifically, that God is Spirit, that God is omnipotent, there is no devil, there is no evil, there is no power in those appearances that the world calls evil, and the moment our fear is withdrawn from them, they have lost their power over us, because the only power they ever had was our fear of nothingness. Now, I ask you to see this, that never before has it been made as clear to the world as in this age that God is Spirit, that God is omnipotent, therefore there is no devil. Whether you begin back in the earliest metaphysical days of Mrs. Eddy with her there is no evil, or evil isn't real, and so forth and so on, or whether you come right on up to the present day when it has been revealed through millions of healings that disease isn't what it appears to be. Even death isn't what it appears to be. Now that we've seen this, it should be so much easier for us to grasp the idea of an infinite God, an omnipotent God of spirit, and be as willing to drop the devil from our catechism as the church is willing to drop the devil from its. When we drop the devil, we drop it in its full significance, evil. And it makes no difference then what the form of evil. We're dropping it completely in the realization of the omnipotent, infinite, spiritual nature of God. Now, so that we never make the mistake that the world is making and has been making for the past generations, and believe that God and man are two separate beings. There's the trick. Everyone says, oh yes, God is omnipotent, but what has that to do with me? Or, yes, God is spirit, what has that to do with me? How can I be sure that that will be of any benefit to me? God is life eternal. How do I know that that has any benefit for me? So that mistake is never made. Let us remember that we are dealing now with the message of the infinite ray, in which it is made so clear to every one of us that there is not a God and a man. There's no such thing as God life and man's life. There is no such thing as the Spirit of God and the Spirit of man. These are one. I and the Father are one. Thou seest me, thou seest the Father that sent me. And therefore, when you speak of God as Spirit, you are speaking of yourself. For God is indeed your selfhood. You can't claim God as your personal selfhood apart from mine, but you can claim God as your selfhood as long as you're willing to acknowledge that God is universal selfhood, the selfhood of you and of me, of friend and of foe. The moment you are ready to acknowledge that, you have started removing from your life all fear. And when fear goes, sin goes. When fear goes, death goes. And when sin and death go, there is no more chance for the world to go decadent. Because it can only go decadent through sin and death. Those are the two doorways that lead to the end of civilizations. But if you persist in having a God who is infinite, and not including yourself in that infinity, then you might just as well never have heard of spiritual truth. Because the one great benefit, I may say the one that puts all others aside and makes them unnecessary, is the fact that whatever God is, I am, because I and the Father are one. So when I talk of God being omnipotent, I haven't left myself out. When I speak of God as life eternal, I'm speaking of my life, because I've come to oneness. I've come to the realization that I and the Father are one. And don't think for a minute that my passing from this human scene would change that. Oh no, it would just mean that I had outgrown my present position, like a 6-year-old child outgrows theirs and becomes 12, and a 12-year-old outgrows theirs and becomes 18, and so forth. We are always outgrowing our present day. And the day must come when we are given other tasks to do besides just continuing housework. You've probably heard the story of the 79-year-old lady who was supposed to be dying, and I called on her and sat with her for a few hours, and she was up and well the next day. And then someone asked the question, Now, why did you save her life? What is she going to do with it the rest of her days? Knit booties for her grandchildren? My answer is, I don't care what she does with her life the rest of her days. If she wants to knit booties, let her go ahead and knit booties. Maybe the healing will awaken her to a desire to know God. But if not, I don't care. I proved one thing, and that's the only reason I went there. I went there to prove that there is not a God life and a woman's life. There is not a God life and your life. And every time that I'm called on for healing, and the only reason I've kept it up this long, until we could prepare some practitioners to take over that work, the only reason I've kept it up is that I must, for the sake of the infinite way, and whatever spiritual good or grace it can add to the world, I must prove that there is not the life of God and the life of man, that these are one. And therefore, since the life of God is infinite, omnipotent, spiritual, omnipresent, the life of man is infinite, omnipotent, omnipresent, spiritual. Now remember this. Don't have God and man. Back in the infinite way, in the early chapters, you will read that the major premise of this work is embodied in two tiny words. The word is and the word as. And you know, nothing has ever changed since that book was written. God is, and God is as man. In other words, God appears as individual being. Therefore, every individual being is the life of God, the mind of God, the soul of God, the Spirit of God, individually appearing. If you ever separate God and man, if you ever separate the life of God and the life of man, the mind of God and the mind of man, or the soul of God and the soul of man, you'll have this world back where it was when all the civilizations were lost, because man had no contact with God, and he had to amuse himself in some way, and he found all these other ways. The moment man realizes himself in God, he doesn't need all of these outside amusements. He doesn't need all of these outside pastimes. He begins to live within himself in an inner communion. But he does something more than that. The moment a person begins to find a communion with the Spirit of God that is within them, they find a communion with every other soul on the face of the globe that has the same leaning. And it's always pure, and it's always clean, and it's always helpful. It's always healing. It's the most marvelous communion because you're always recognizing God as the center of the individual. You're recognizing God as the life. You wouldn't any more desecrate the life of your friend, knowing that life to be God, than you would desecrate your own life. You would no more desecrate your life once you know God to be your life. Well, you just wouldn't. You just couldn't. And that's all that's to it. And it is only this that saves us, that makes us a community of people who live in God, as God, in each other, for each other, with each other, because we're recognizing each other as that one infinite divine selfhood individually expressing itself here on earth. And then how else can we be to each other, especially if we remember the Master statement, inasmuch as ye did it unto the least of these my brethren, ye did it unto me. Inasmuch as ye did it not unto the least of these my brethren, ye did it not unto me. And just remember that with those words, we never forget that every good that we do unto each other, we are really doing unto the God being. Every bit of good we withhold from each other, or every bit of injury we do to another, who do you think we're doing it to? God, which is ourself.